All right, Bethel, Bay Park, welcome back. It's been, about a week and a half since we wrapped up our Crucial Conversations series. We ended with the topic that kind of opened up the Pandora's box, I would say. We were talking with Andy about environmentalism and Christianity and everything in between within those subjects. And we had probably the most questions we had out of all 3 of the weeks. And actually, in my experience with our hot seat Sundays, probably the most questions we've ever had, period, for anything we've done like this with Bay Park. So it only seemed fitting to rope in Andy once more and continue to pick his brain with some more of your questions. So Andy, thank you for joining us again.
Oh, you're very welcome. And of course, all those questions, Ryan, that could be a good thing or a bad thing. The good thing could be that this is a really crucial topic that people are thinking about. The bad thing could be I'm just a terrible communicator and nothing was clear and just people need help. So we British like to be self-deprecating, so I'll assume it's the latter. So hopefully we can clear some things up in this time.
Okay, well, I'll try to play the positive spin and tell you it's probably the first.
That's good. That'd be good for us all, yeah, kind of thing.
Yeah, especially for your self-esteem. Okay, so Andy, our first question is more of like a clarification question. So in your talk, you said use John 3:16 for God so loved the world, yes. A verse a lot of us know, to talk about, God loves the world, like literally the earth. And a question came in that said, does the original Greek / Hebrew for world in John 3:16 include both the people of the world as well as creation and the earth?
Yes, I'm going to be very careful here, not being a Greek scholar, Ryan, because I get myself in so much hot water. But from memory, my understanding last time I dug into the Greek is that yes, that word is called a cosmos. It's kind of all-encompassing. It really is everything. It's the whole created order. And of course, that would also fit in with, of course, there's a range of words and terms used across Scripture. And you see that theme right the way through. I mean, I think I, in the talk, quoted from Genesis chapter 1, where God says, God created the various things in the world, and they are good. They are good. They are good. They are good. And yes, it comes to human beings who bear the image of God, and it's very good. But God is the positive all that way through. And what I find fascinating is we can sometimes take that for granted, not realize how sort of actually shocking that was. In the Greek world into which Christianity emerged, the material was often considered bad and negative. It was a thing you wanted to escape from. And Christians and Jews went, no, this is good. God's created it. And then even today, other belief systems, you have religions like Buddhism that are really based upon the idea, you want to get detached from desire. Don't be attached to anything, and certainly not anything in the created world. Or religions like Islam, where when Allah in the Quran creates the world, certainly it's all powerful, but he doesn't speak that affirmative, it is good, it is good. It is good over it. And in fact, the Quran describes the world as a place where created human beings to be flung into when they were cast out of paradise for sinning. And in the Quran, human beings were upstairs. They were in heaven when they sinned, not down here in the Garden of Eden. So Christianity is quite unique. Christianity and Judaism, to be fair, are quite unique. And this very positive view of creation. So John 3:16 fits that much broader pattern. And then, of course, the other side of the text, later on in the New Testament, new heavens and new earth. Nowhere does the New Testament teach that we're going to escape from this world and just float around on clouds somewhere. Rather, the whole biblical story, the whole story of what God has done in Christ is about God's kingdom coming. So the whole of creation is reordered the way it should be. So the Bible has this magnificent vision, and yes, human beings very central as image bearers, but God's got this vision for creation too.
I'm so glad the vision is so big and so broad, and it's not just, it's holistic too, not just spiritual, but also God's concerned about the physical as well. So we also got a number of questions on, actually many questions on a specific topic. So you had talked on Sunday about how we need to look at our own actions, right? We need to look at our own materialism. We need to look at our own kind of greed that's feeding into climate change and into some of these things we're seeing going on with the environment. But we had one question on Sunday, and then many more about the actions of the general public. So like large scale corporations and politics that are beyond our own individual moral choices.
That's right.
So there are a number of people wanting you to like dig deeper into
Mm,
that. So for example, one question was, industry is a major driver of environmental devastation. As Christians, what should be our stance
mm,
personally, politically, collectively towards
mm.
overconsumption? And someone also asked about evangelicals supporting political parties which don't care about the environment. So can you just maybe take some time to speak more
Yeah.
into the whole corporate side of things as well?
Yeah. And then politics as well. So, totally non-controversial. That's what I like there, Ryan. We're not going to upset anybody. So starting on the corporate, yeah, I think I may have said this actually on the day that to go. I think, in terms of our response to consumers and stuff, we can absolutely start small. I can choose, what products I buy. I can, you can make intelligent choices. You can put a little bit of effort in and go, okay, that food item that I'm going to buy, that very, very cheap food item, why is it cheap? And then you can look on the back and go, oh, hell, that's interesting. It contains palm oil produced in a non-sustainable way, and I've read about that, and that's not a good thing. Okay, maybe I could buy another product that's a few cents more, or if that's not an option, do I need that product? Do I need that chocolate bar, or could I do something else? So we can think about our own choice. I think that ties into the whole "This is my Father's world" thing. Remember, I used that hymn, and I said, that little prayer in that hymn, "This is my Father's world." That's not a bad mantra to have in your head. A good little prayer to have as you go through life. Really going, are my actions, are they reflecting this is my Father's world in the way that I'm treating it, or am I in danger of treating it like a commodity? Is the first thing. So I think we can think about our own choices. We can certainly encourage others. We can engage in a bit of lobbying. That's not a problem at all. We can encourage our friends and our family. If for those of us who live in family, I realize not everyone watching this will be living in a family. There'll be folks who are single, living on their own. But if you're living in a family or community, have that discussion. If you are living in a family situation, bring your kids into that and help them begin to think about how our Christian faith impacts on those choices, because that's a really great way, to raise the next generation. And then, of course, we can vote similarly with our wallets as well, in terms of where we invest our money and which products we buy. And we can ask, good questions. We can ask about sustainability. If you're going out and you have to buy a new car or something, when you're at the showroom, you can ask the dealer, tell me about the environmental footprint of this vehicle. What's the impact of this, and factor that in to your equations. And that's just good stewardship. You don't need to say become a crazy eco warrior and spray paint yourself green, but you can still ask those kind of wise questions about how something is produced and what's the impact. And I think that's just an example of good Christian discipleship. I think if we take Christian faith seriously, Ryan, it should affect everything. It should affect our purchasing. It should affect our consumption. And sometimes we've separated those things off. Now, when it comes to politics, here things get interesting. I mean, at least, praise the Lord, in Canada and the USA, you have more choice. I remember, talking to, an American friends around the last election and saying, and them just like bewailing and going, how do we choose? Because on the one hand, we want to vote for a party that, isn't like madly pro-abortion, which would tend to lead you more Republican. But on the other hand, we want to vote for a party that's like green and has good environmental credentials. But that leads us back the other way. Where is a party that brings together those concerns? Now, in Canada and Europe and America and Britain, we have more political parties, right? We're not just two parties, but I still think we have some of those issues where no one party lines up. You're not going to sit down as a Christian and go, okay, the things I care about are this issue, and this issue. Oh, look, there's a party that meets all of them. The tricky thing in politics, right, is going, man, okay, this party meets these things, this party meets these things. And I think that's where the best you can do is, have that, prayerfully think about what are the issues that matter to you. Talk about that with friends and family. Talk about that as Christians, and then prayerfully vote accordingly. But vote realizing that there is no perfect match, because that means you then treat others with humility. And if you talk, fellow Christians who voted differently, because they've equally listed the issues, maybe they've listed the very same issues as you, they've just weighted them slightly differently, and go, okay, that's interesting. That's why I've done that. And then I think the other thing, Ryan, we need more Christian men and women involved in politics. It was my privilege when I was in Canada to get to know quite a lot of, Christian MPs up there in Ottawa, and I was hugely impressed with the work that they do But I think a lot of Christians sort of shy away from politics. Well, don't shy away. We need more good people in politics. And if Christians vacate the political arena because it's so difficult and toxic, and boy, it is, it's not easy, then things would be, I think they'd be very, very different. And then one last thought here, by the way, great evangelistic way forward for those watching who are Christians. Think about reaching out and building a relationship with your local politicians. So often I hear politicians tell me that the only time they ever hear from Christians are when we're writing angry letters, often badly spelt, as one put it to me. So go, what about if more Christians wrote to their local MP and said, look, I may not agree with you on everything, but I am so grateful for your service. We need people to be public spirited and do their best for their community. And just wanted to let you know, I'm a Christian. I don't know what you believe, but I'm praying for you and for your family. And thank you for what you do. So go, if we led that way, I wonder how many more interesting conversations there would be. How many more MPs would be willing to, come and speak in a church on a Sunday and be grilled, would be more willing to listen to Christian voices if we led with praying for you, realize it's tough, those kind of things, rather than you've got it wrong on these 3 issues, bang, 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 bang. What does it look like to perhaps model what it means to be a follower of Christ in the public square? And I know it's not always easy. It's not always easy, but I think we need to think more wisely about it at times.
That's great. Thanks, Andy. Thanks for addressing controversial subjects too, and not shying away from them yourself.
Any complaints people can send to Mark Kochipur at Bethel,
right,
he would be happy to receive them.
Yes, definitely not anyone at Bay Park. Just purely purely Bethel, and probably send a letter that's spelled poorly as well.
Yes, Mark would appreciate it.
So another non-controversial thing. Some of our Bay Park or Bethel family seem concerned that active issues. So a week and a bit ago, we talked about environmental issues. Before then, we talked about racial reconciliation. They're worried that things like this can overshadow concerns for gospel, like salvation and conversion. So, for example, one question was, how do we ensure things like sustainability, reconciliation don't overshadow the primary job we have of making disciples? Where's the balance?
Oh, what a brilliant question! And I would certainly agree with the tone in which it's asked, because I think balance is the question. Sometimes you hear people asking it, sometimes occasionally you come across people who are really antsy. They're like, we shouldn't be talking about these things, just preach the gospel. And I'm like, well, if that's the case, Jesus didn't get the memo, because Jesus spent a lot of time talking about poverty and injustice. Then we come to the book of Acts, and early on in the book of Acts, the Christians there are largely concerned, not just preaching the gospel, they're concerned with making sure that the widows and the orphans are getting fed. And there's a big debate about, how that's handled and so on. And then Paul spends a lot of his time, traveling around collecting money for the church in Jerusalem, primarily because they're poor, because of the persecution that broke out, shortly after the resurrection. And so the New Testament is full of stuff around justice and so on. Jesus' parables are full of it. And, just follow the theme of the poor through the Gospels and see how often Jesus has some words to say about this. And then, of course, the book of James is fantastic in the New Testament because it pulls no punches. And basically, if you go around preaching the gospel and saying, be blessed, isn't life wonderful? But you don't give food to somebody who's starving, then you are no good at all. And then, of course, perhaps most controversial, the parable of the sheep and the goats, where Jesus defines, those who will end up going into the fire as those who've said to, who haven't fed the poor, who haven't visited the sick, who haven't visited those who are wrongfully arrested. So, boy, the New Testament has some things to challenge us, right, on justice. But also, of course, the New Testament is totally gospel-centered, because what matters is how we respond to Jesus. And the only thing I can say in answer to the question, I guess, Ryan, is we just need to constantly and prayerfully hold those two things together. And depending on which you lead with will depend on the situation. If you are walking down the street and you see somebody sleeping rough in a shop doorway who's clearly in real trouble and difficulty, and you walk on by and don't do anything, I think there are some issues. I think you need to lead there with, gosh, this person needs help. How can I help get this person, a roof over their head and some food? And then, as you've sorted that out for them, absolutely, you want to say, by the way, the reason I've rearranged my day and got you some help and got you sorted and comfortable is because I'm a Christian. And I think it demonstrates the love of Christ to do that. So you can bring the gospel right into the social action that you're doing. And then the flip side of it is when someone becomes a Christian, a follower of Jesus, that surely has to change how you behave, and the way that you act. And we see this all across the New Testament. What does Zacchaeus do when he becomes a follower of Christ? He decides he's going to, give, not just pay back and do justice, because he's, presumably rendered people in poverty because of his money grabbing habits. The first thing he figures out he has to do is put things right financially. And Jesus isn't going, oh, no, don't worry about that, Zacchaeus. No, that's not important. Just go and preach. He's like, yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. Salvation has come to this house today. And so I think we just need to figure out how to put these things together. And what I find fascinating is I think this is a very 21st century problem for Christians in some ways, Ryan, because I look back through history and so many of my heroes of faith got the two things together, like William Wilberforce, we talked about politics earlier, right? Campaigning British politician, just, phenomenal in terms of the work that he and others did on the abolition of the slave trade. He spent 45 years of his life fighting a justice issue, but boy, did he preach the gospel. He preached it in politics, he preached it outside, he wrote books and tracts and pamphlets, he led many people to Christ, he partnered up with John Newton, guy who wrote Amazing Grace, and just, amazing impact on British society. Wilberforce didn't see those two things as separate, he saw them together. One of my own more recent heroes, Leslie Newbigin, not so well known now, but very influential Anglican preacher, pastor, missionary, went to India, 20th century, and planted many churches, but also organized hospitals and orphanages and all these other things. And Newbigin said, it adds real energy to our preaching, because when people come to church on a Sunday, it matters that the people they hear preaching Christ are the people who have healed their sick, the people who have educated their children, the people who have fed the starving. And that gives our message a credibility. People are like, okay, we want to know what's different about you people. And then we tell them it's Jesus. We preach the gospel. So I think it's not either or, it's both and. And I think just prayerfully pray that one through. And yeah, if all you're doing is social action and never preaching Christ, there's a problem. But if all you're doing is preaching Christ and not ever helping somebody in need, then I think Jesus would have some words for you too.
That's great. Thanks, Andy. I've been reading Generous Justice by Timothy Keller.
By Tim Keller, yeah.
Yeah. And in there, he talks about Jonathan Edwards, I believe it was, who is like famous for the sermon Sinners in the Hand of an Angry God, and for like revival movements where the gospel's been shared. But then he quotes a number of like other sermons from these like revival teachers that are really gospel centric, where they were also really concerned about justice and were concerned about care.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's incredible. Like, we haven't necessarily had that dichotomy in previous years that we're seeming to like have in the 21st century for some reason.
I think just very quickly, I think there's a couple of things going on, because you make a hugely important point. I think on the environment issue, it staggered me when you read the work that's been done on this. People like Luther, Calvin, Jonathan Edwards, these great giants of the Reformation, they loved nature, and their journals are full of reflections on it and are full of concern for the damage that was being done. So actually, the environmental movement really actually, has its roots way back in the Reformed tradition of Christianity, which is not something you would imagine. But I think where the two have gone apart, it connects to the politics question earlier. What's happened is politics has split, and Christians have allowed that split to infect the church, where it's like, well, okay, you must either be in favor of justice and these big issues out here, or you must be in favor of the gospel and moral issues. And it's like, well, actually, no, let's put the two back together. Let's not let our progressive friends run off with this stuff. Let's go, that's a Christian issue, thank you. And again, we need more Christians involved in it. And if more Christians, ran towards some of these movements and got involved again, we could perhaps recover some of the wrong direction. And so, yeah, let's not abandon the playing field. Let's go, thank you, this world is God's world, and being a Christian has implications for everything, and let's live that out as God's people. And I think we might be taken more seriously, actually.
And I think that segues really nicely into our next question. It's a bit of a long question, but I think this person was trying to explain where they were coming from. So I'll just read the whole thing for you, Andy, and let you kind of respond to bits and pieces of it as you can. So it says, why do you say only the Christian faith can save the environment when almost every religion has similar things to be said about the environment? Additionally, If you argue that the Christian God is the only God, then how is that helpful for the millions of people that don't believe in God? You argue that talking about the future generation doesn't work because some people don't have children, so it doesn't apply to them. When using the Christian religion as the reason to care for the environment, people use your same argument of, well, I don't
Right.
Christianity, so this doesn't apply to me.
Okay. Yeah. All kinds of things going on there. So let's start at the beginning. I would say that it is not the case that every religion and worldview says the same thing about the natural world. We talked about that at the top of the recording, actually. I mean, take Islam, which is a religion I know perhaps the most about after Christianity, because I've been studying it for 20 years. My PhD is in Quranic studies, so I know Quranic theology fairly well. And as I say, in the Quran, massive contrast. In the Quran, Adam and Eve are created in heaven. They're upstairs in paradise. They're not, the Garden of Eden is not down on earth. And when they sin in paradise, when God casts them out, they're not told get out, which is what basically God says in the book of Genesis, get out of the garden. In the Quran, they're told get down from here, down to the earth, which will be a place of trial and testing for you. In it, you shall remain for a while, but in the end, you may be taken out. And so really on that view, the earth is a prison camp, and the earth is going to be destroyed in Islam. Really our future life, for those who will have an eternal existence after death in Islam really is upstairs. It's in paradise. There's no new heavens. There's no new earth. And, those who've explored that answer say that, it's not an accident that really the Islamic world has not produced any kind of mass environmental movements. The modern environmental movement is thoroughly a Christian movement by root. If you look at the founding fathers and mothers of it, and there was a great book written by a guy called Mark Stoll or Mark Knoll, I get the two Marks mixed up, about 3-4 years ago, called Inherit to the Holy Mountain, where he traces that. He looks at all the kind of biographies of those who founded the environmental movement and shows how they were thoroughly Christian. They either were Christian or they were hugely influenced and grown up in Christian homes. That hasn't happened in the Islamic world. Or, to bring it a bit closer to home, Ryan, atheism. Atheism really does imply that whatever you do, whatever choices you make, this world will burn. Eventually, the human race will become extinct. Eventually, the sun will expand and swallow the earth. Everything comes to an end, empty and dark and cold and alone. And no wonder that atheists who thought deeply about that, people like Bertrand Russell, Friedrich Nietzsche, Albert Camus, those atheists of another generation who are more willing to really reflect on the despairing implications of their atheism, basically ended up saying everything's absurd. Camus, in his book The Myth of Sisyphus, doesn't matter what you do, the whole thing ends up where it began. Change isn't possible. Bertrand Russell, the only certainty is despair. And so I'd say I don't think atheism gives you any foundations, whereas Christianity, as I explored in that talk, says this is a good world. God created it. God created it, thinks deeply and highly of it. It's very, very good. He's got a plan for it. There's a future for this creation, not just for the human beings who are in God's image. And so Christianity stands head and shoulders above those other worldviews. That's the first thing. And then secondly, the thing that the questioner was picking me up on in terms of, well, hang on, if I'm not a Christian, how does this apply? To go, in a sense, they've got it the wrong way around. What I was trying to say in the talk, and I apologize if I could have been clearer for this person, I was simply saying, if you love the environment, if you care for the environment, which is, I'm assuming, for people who are watching that talk, they probably did, otherwise they'd have gone and done something else with their Sunday morning, then they're going, you then need to ask, okay, where does that belief grounded? What are my foundations? And the same goes for other things. You can run the same for human rights. If I believe in human rights and dignity and justice, as so many Canadians do, okay, what's that belief sitting on? What I was saying in my talk is going, I don't know any other foundation for environmental care other than the Christian faith. So if you care about the environment, if the natural world matters to you and you think it is important, then I want to say, come home to the Christian faith. Come home to the Christian faith. If on the other hand you wish to be an atheist or a humanist or a secularist, it's absolutely fine. But be consistent and recognize that you are living on a kind of a sort of borrowed worldview. There's a wonderful book. Excuse me while I stand up and grab it from my shelf. There's a wonderful book written a couple of years ago now by Tom Holland, which made a lot of waves on both sides of the Atlantic. Actually, Tom Holland's book Dominion. Tom is not a Christian. I think he's an agnostic, if anything. And in Dominion, what Tom argues is that everything that we hold dear in the West is thoroughly Christian. Even the most progressive secularist is actually living on Christian foundations, because it all goes back to the fact that human value, human life is precious, humans have dignity, the natural world matters, all these kind of things. He says that was totally counterintuitive in the ancient world, totally counterintuitive. We did not get that from Greek classical civilization, nor do we stumble across it fully formed sometime around about the 1960s. It comes to us from the Christian faith and the Christian impact on the West. That's where we get the idea that men and women bear the image of God, why people have value and dignity, even if they are wildly different to us. And that's where we get the idea that things like the natural world matter. So it wasn't so much of a case that for me trying to argue from that to Christianity, so much as challenging people, look at your foundations, and ask yourself some tough questions about them. I hope that sort of helps and deals with both aspects of it. And if not, they can, hopefully whoever asked that question, if they hear that answer, can come back to us. Mark's cell phone number will flash up. No, it won't. By the way, I need to stress that Ryan and Mark and I, we are really good friends. And certainly Mark, well, I've only met Ryan a couple of times, but Mark and I are good friends, and our whole relationship is built on being rude to each other. We used to love hanging out in Canada and just teasing each other the whole evening. So, I wish he was on this here on this recording, actually, because we'd have even more fun. But yeah.
I was thinking as you're saying that, Andy, an illustration I often use is like, and I really like mental images. I'm a very like visual kind of person of like, I think in the 21st century in North America, we're hanging out in this like treehouse, which is in these branches, right? And we have all these values and these moral rights and wrongs and senses. And I don't think people realize that you're hanging out in this treehouse and you're rooted in this tree that actually goes down into Christian beliefs and principles. And it's terrifying for people to realize that sometimes, of like, I don't want to be this dependent on the Christian worldview. And I didn't, without even realizing it, right? And so I think people are often kind of shocked to realize how much the things that are valuable and important to them are built upon and built in this tree of like the Christian worldview.
You're right, and I think the thing that I found fascinating about that, Ryan, and also in some ways slightly frightening actually, is several writers, not least as a brilliant British political journalist called Douglas Murray, who's an atheist but very sympathetic with Christianity. He's talked about the idea that he worries how long the West, Europe, Canada, America, can continue on sort of borrowed foundations, because obviously we live in a post-Christian culture, but there's still a momentum going, so we still have human rights and dignity and these kinds of things. How far can that carry you when people say they no longer believe or even want to rip out the foundations? And I think, for example, one place you can see some worrying trends for me, you look about the way that our culture has forgotten the virtue of forgiveness. Say the wrong thing on social media, you are never forgiven. As we call it in the UK, offence archaeology. Some poor celebrity or politician tweeted the wrong thing about gender or something 15 years ago, and somebody goes and finds it and waves it around, career destroyed. If you say the wrong thing, tweet the wrong thing, don't have the right opinion on a whole variety now of topics, then there is no forgiveness. There is no way back. And Douglas Murray, in his book, The Madness of Crowds, has a beautiful chapter on forgiveness, where he actually end up quoting the Bible, which is hilarious, because he's an outspoken, well, he's not outspoken, he's an atheist and gay as well. So he's not some right-wing conservative Christian. But he said, we've forgotten these kind of virtues, and he sees it only getting worse as this goes on. So, but yeah, I like your treehouse analogy.
I have a couple really quick fire questions for you, just like we did.
Brilliant. Let's go for it. Because we're doing long answers, because these are great questions. Let's go quick fire. Go on then.
So I got 3 of them. Okay. So first, should Christians be vegan? And I know that's maybe not a good quick fire one, but let's take a stab.
I'm going to probably cause huge controversy to people by saying no, by the word should. If you choose to be, great. The reason I say no is I think the Bible actually gives you the mandate to eat more widely and include animal products in your diet. But I think you could certainly build a very clear scriptural argument that we should do that with care and compassion. So there's a big argument for care in our farming practices, I think, and there are Christians who've written on that kind of subject. But the other thing I'd want to add here is sometimes, only just sometimes, veganism can lead you to a sort of laziness about, well, I'm vegan, I don't need to ask tough questions. But actually you do, because there are aspects of the vegan diet that can be as problematic as a more omnivore-based diet. So, for example, one or two of we have quite a few vegan friends. Several of them are very, very addicted to avocados. Avocados seems to turn up in everything. Avocado is horrendous in terms of the farming practices. In countries where water is a huge resource, is a very limited resource, but avocados take insane amounts of water to produce, and then it's flown thousands of miles around the world. So rich Westerners can eat it on their plate and feel superior because they're not eating beef that was raised organically and free range on a piece of land that's not good for growing anything else. And I have a friend who's a Mennonite in the States. So they're in beef country. So in our part of the country, beef is sustainable. It's the only thing actually you can raise on this land, and we grow it organically, sustainably. So, it's not as straightforward as that. Or palm oil we mentioned earlier. Lots of vegan products, if you're not careful, contain those kind of ingredients, and those are often done non-sustainably. So being a vegan can trap you or lull you into thinking, I don't have to think about my food choices. Think about your food choices. Ask where it comes from. Ask those questions. Ask the food justice questions. That's a Christian thing to do. And then praise the Lord and thank the Lord for what's on the plate in front of you, and don't judge others. That would be the New Testament. If you're a vegan, that's great, but don't look down on others. And if you're an omnivore like me, don't make snide remarks about what's on their barbecue. But find ways to come together. Maybe 2 barbecues, but come together and enjoy fellowship.
That's
a longer answer, but that was such a darn good question. So
that's good. Yeah, I feel I need to research avocados now because they're one of my favorite foods.
I know, as too, because the kids used to be addicted to them, and then we got a bit horrified. You can get sustainably grown ones, but there's a lot of water in an avocado.
So
sorry, carry on. Let's not. We get angry emails from the Avocado Growers Association of North America or something.
Yeah. Okay, so this one's directed right to you. Has Andy come across, and I don't know how to pronounce it, Araka, a very good care organization?
Yes, I have. And like you, I'm never quite sure how to pronounce it, but I have. And you can, it's Arocha from memory, Aroka. Put that into Google, you'll find it. Yes, that's, and there are others. I mean, I would not want to give the impression that there's no Christians doing stuff on the environment. Quite the opposite. And there's also lots of Christians working in environmental science. I've got a good friend who teaches at a major university just down the road from where I live, and he teaches on sort of geography and sustainability stuff, and he's doing fantastic work helping raise a new generation of ecologists, and he's thoroughly Christian, and he takes every opportunity he can to drop that into his lectures. So yeah, but they're a great organization. Encourage people to look them up, check them out. Lots of resources online.
And then when you had your latest convention in the UK, what was one of the best questions regarding the environment you received, and what was your answer?
Oh yeah, because I told this story of, we had this, I was involved in this this conference where we had like 1,600 young people in London. We divide the world into before COVID and after COVID, don't we? So that was BC, back in the days when you could have large events and that was allowed. So that would have been, September 2019, I think. I won't say, I'm not sure about best, because there were a whole massive variety of questions, and just picking one is tough. I will tell you the question though, Ryan, that really struck me, and there were various forms of it. There was a mixed audience. Yes, it was Christian, but there must have been about 10%, 15% not Christian. Lots of questions around fear. And I remember there were at least 2 or 3 questions along the line of, why is there any point going on? Why is there any point trying to make a difference or have children or anything? Because the world's going to end within our generation. And that really saddened me, because there are certainly environmental groups and lobbyists who I think have put that narrative out there. You've got Extinction Rebellion, very big over here in Europe. I think you have those guys in North America too, XR. You have, to a lesser extent, Greta Thunberg, the sort of the wee girl who's done a lot for the environmental kind of movement, but at times can lean a bit. We're all doomed. And that really saddened me, because that young people have got it into their head that there's no point doing anything, that fear is the only response, is tragic. And I think Christianity has something to say here, of saying, as Christians, we can say, the world is messy. Let's not deny that. I mean, you only have to look at, you don't have to get into controversial things like climate change. Just look at plastic in the oceans. It's walk along any beach and go, get a problem. But I also believe that a damaged world with plastic in the oceans and an ecosystem that's really struggling is not God's last word. I also believe there is hope. I believe as Christians, we have a mandate to care for the earth. God's gone, there's a task. Go on, people, get on with it. But I also believe that, yes, we're going to mess things up because we're not perfect, we're not God, but also that God in the end is going to put that right, that which is still undone. And everything that is, somebody, I forget which theologian wrote this, it sounds like a Tim Keller quote actually, that, everything bad will come untrue. And I think that's the story of the gospel. So it gives us hope. And so I was very struck by that question. And I really came away thinking, man, one of the things that we need to speak as Christians into society is hope. And then, of course, bang, along comes COVID. And I think there's a lot of people despairing and going, will the world ever be the same again? And I think there's a real opportunity for us as Christians to be saying, actually, yes, there's light at the end of the tunnel because, God's given us minds and brains and given us science. That's a great gift. But you know what? Even if the world's totally different, even if we live in a world where international travel is not as common, you know what? There is still hope because the gospel says there is something deeper and truer than just the ability to have cheap foreign holidays or to be able to, consume wildly without any thought of the consequences. There is hope. And Christians need to be hope speakers in the age that we live in.
Great. Thanks, Andy. And I would like that to be the last question, but I want to sneak in just a little bit more from you. I know I have you for like maybe a couple more minutes.
5 more minutes, maybe. Yeah. 5 more
minutes.
So
we had a lot of questions about practical steps, which you've already given us some in our conversation here. But can you just, any more practical steps? Lots of people reaching out, wanting to know, what do I do next? What do I do now? So just tips in that direction.
Yeah. Well, let me start with, and I mentioned it, I think, on when we did the live event. There's a wonderful little book by J. Matthew Sleeth called "Serve God, Save the Planet," and it touches on some of the themes we talked about today. I mean, it's a brilliant attempt to sort of show that actually it's not environmentalism or the gospel; it's both those things. And it's not perfect because he's experimenting and figuring things out, but it's a brilliant book and it's got some really practical suggestions. And he's someone who's walked the walk because he and his family, he was a doctor before he retired, had a massive house and all that kind of American lifestyle. And just as he began thinking and praying, just felt very challenged to make some changes. And he and his family downsized and stuff. And so I love the kind of practical steps in that book and centered around the journey they want as a family. So that book is a great place to start, Ryan, because people can read it through and go, oh, I like that idea. Well, that was good for them. I'm not doing that. First thing. Secondly, I think just begin being more prayerfully intentional about the choices you make. One of the problems, I think, and it ties us back to consumerism at the start, right? We have grown up in a culture where we are incredibly unusual. We're unusual in world civilization and history, but we're also unusual as Christians in that we have grown up in a culture where we can have whatever we want, with almost, no effort. You don't have to grow it. You don't have to make it. If you want something, you just order it on Amazon. Other online retailers are available. You just go to the grocery store and it's there on the shelf for you, which means we don't think about it. In previous generations, you thought more. Maybe you harvested your vegetables and your fruit in the summer and you stored it up for the winter and you were conscious, man, we've got to be careful because those apples need to last the winter and therefore I'm not going to go and have 3. But I think we've become a bit too lazy. And so being a bit more prayerful, one way you can start bringing this into things is, if you don't already, start saying grace when you eat, because it just reminds you that what's on your plate is God's gift. It wasn't just something you got at the food basics store. It was actually God is behind this. Involve your kids in those conversations for those of us who have families, so they begin thinking about actually this is a gift here. Maybe find some practical ways to make some changes. Again, prayerfully, with your family, sit down, perhaps look at some of the consuming habits you have as a family, and go, where could we make some little changes? Where, without doing drastic things, where are there some simple things that we could do that reflect that we believe this is our Father's world? So I think that's another thing we can do as well. And then I think the final thing we can do as well is, ultimately, when you read the Genesis story at the beginning of the Bible, of course, we come, it is good, it is good, it is good. Come to human beings, it is very good. And creation is amazing, but human beings are very special because we were created in God's image. And I think the more we can remember, particularly for those of us living in the West, Canada, America, Europe, that our choices, it's not just environmental impact, it's the poorest who suffer those environmental impacts. Anything you can do to make a connection to some of those countries where people are suffering perhaps the brunt of this stuff more than we are, who can be shielded through the resources we have in the West, is helpful. So maybe you want to maybe think prayerfully about supporting a missionary. You do it through the church, but do it practically, personally. Find a missionary. I'm sure your church will help you if you're looking for a missionary support who's in a country where actually, some of the impacts of environmental change are felt, where there's flooding and, drought and stuff, because they'll be able to tell you what's going on, what the issues are. Or sponsor a child. So one of the things that we do as a family for years now, that Compassion, and there are other organizations that do it, we've sponsored a couple of kids in Haiti, and that really put us in touch with what was going on, because there are pollution issues, there are other issues, but rather than just see it in the abstract, we see it through the eyes of the kids that we're supporting. And it means when we pray, it brings it home. When we think about it, it brings it home. So start small, think about your choices, make some small changes, don't be drastic, start small, and then find a way to connect you to some human beings, image bearers for whom this is an issue. And of course, to bring these issues back together, if you're sponsoring a family or a child in the third world, 2/3 world, make sure you tell them why you're doing it as well, that they know you're doing it because Christ loves them and you love them and you want them to see that love in action.
Well, thank you, Andy. I better let you go. I know you have another meeting, but on behalf of Bethel and Bay Park, thank you so much for coming back and encouraging us in this journey.
It's been totally brilliant doing it, Ryan. I think there's already talk about me being part of the series next time, so I hope that'll happen, and would love to do that again, because I really enjoyed the privilege of it. So thank you for taking the time to do the interview.